Hi, everybody. Jose Palomino with another episode of our podcast. And today's special guest is David Masover. And David really digs into the whole issue of getting more out of your sales process, out of your sales team, and doing so by really breaking down barriers between perhaps you as an owner, leader, as a manager, and your salespeople. How to actually align them towards success, how to think through the process steps involved in getting them on the same page, and how to create a more valuable experience for your customers. So a win-win-win every way you slice it. So we're going to hear from David right now as he joins our show. Well, welcome, David, to the podcast today. So glad you could be here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, David, for our audience, just a little bit of context. What do you do and who do you do it for primarily?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a one-man show, David Masover Sales Consulting. I've been in sales for 30 years. And over that time, everybody who knows me knows I'm a very process-centric guy. But over the years, what I found is that I really enjoy working with smaller companies. CEO owner is really involved in it, very passionate about the business, isn't as comfortable knowing what to do with sales and how to generate revenue through their sales department. So I've been doing a lot of work around working with leaders like that to create systems and processes and strategies to build, in their words, a system, an engine, a growth machine through their sales team to generate revenue more consistently, more predictably, and more transparently.
Wow, well, that's fantastic because it really resonates with the kind of work I've done, kind of on a top level strategy, often having to recommend to somebody, okay, sales is something we cannot ignore any longer, and that's what happens. It's often the company maybe it grew when the owner had some relationships with some big companies, so they have like 2 or 3 really big accounts, but one of them's going sideways or going to China or something like that, and all of a sudden they realize that we really don't know how to make the phone ring. We don't know how to dial the phone even. We don't know how to do that. So I imagine you run into that guy or gal a lot. So how do you transition somebody who isn't really doing, let's call it sales on purpose, to the kind of rigor and integrated approach that you have? How do you help an owner first recognize, like the first thing is awareness, like recognize that's what they need to do?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of owners in this situation wind up coming to me. I think a lot of people wind up coming to me when they realize this isn't working. And there's usually been some frustration. What I normally find is, as you described perfectly, somebody starts a company, they don't have a background in sales. They're a subject matter expert. They're passionate about their work. And this passion and this enthusiasm and this deep knowledge translates into sales, because sales ultimately is about sharing enthusiasm about solving a problem with something that you're really familiar with and helping somebody out who's in a similar situation to other people you've helped with your solution. And the owner or the CEO or whoever started the company usually just has all that wrapped up. And what I find is they're often very surprised when they take that step to start hiring sales professionals. The line I hear so often is, well, gosh, if I can do it, who knows nothing about sales, I'm going to hire a professional and they're just going to knock the ball out of the park. And it's often very shocking when that simply doesn't happen and they don't know why. And to answer your question, I think one of the most empowering things that happens for folks in that situation is to be able to kind of just get their arms around the whole thing. So often the temptation is, well, if I just get better leads, or if I just get a better website, or if I just had better SEO, or if I just, went to better trade shows or did some one thing. And those things, you try it, it doesn't work. You try it, it doesn't work. Once you have kind of a big picture of, okay, I know what all the pieces are and how they're supposed to work together, then you can start working on one piece at a time in concert with the others. And once that mental map is in place, I think leaders like this actually really get enthusiastic about sales, particularly because they can start to step back because their company begins to have what many of my clients would call a selling system, which didn't exist previous to this deliberate work effort to make that come into fruition.
Now, what's interesting about that, obviously, there's a lot of very big sales methodology companies, from Richardson, Miller Hyman, Sandler, et cetera. And they would say they sell a selling system. But
Mhm.
you're talking about a lot of other moving parts other than skill training.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you cannot ignore helping your salespeople to be more effective in the field. What tends to get ignored is, how does that really integrate into the tools that you're using? And how does that really integrate into the KPIs you're trying to capture? And how do those three things work together? Reps and tools and KPIs. And then once you have good visibility and tools that are working and reps that are engaged with the tools and KPIs that are coming out of it, what should management be doing to help all that work better? So sales methodologies are great and sales skills are super important. You can't really impact sales improvement efforts without them, but you're only going to go so far if that's all you focus on. What you really need is a sales team infrastructure or operating system that integrates all of those different parts and has them leverage each other. So you get kind of a positive flywheel effect instead of solving one thing at a time and having the rest create friction.
Yeah, but David, I'm like a $10 million contract manufacturer. I had a sales guy before, but I spent a lot of money on it, and I've been out in the market. These guys are expensive.
Mhm.
Um, that's not really us. So what's the thought there?
Yeah, I think the conversations usually start when people recognize that the problem is, I don't know how to get what I need to get out of my
Mm.
salespeople. Yes, absolutely. Sales salaries can be very high in a lot of different situations, and that's all the more reason to make sure that there's clarity, and to make sure that there's visibility, and to make sure that expectations are clear, and to make sure that what salesperson A is doing is the same thing as what salesperson B is doing, generally speaking, right? I mean, we're not talking about creating robots,
Right.
but if you think about it from your customer's perspective, let's imagine that you had two salespeople or three salespeople or four salespeople. Is it like a roulette wheel? If when the customer comes up, which one am I going to get, and what's my experience with ABC Manufacturing going to be? If that's how you think you want to go to market, okay, that's pretty common. On the other hand, if you really want to get your arms around your company and grow to the next level, there needs to be some kind of a framework of experience. This is how we go to market. This is how our salespeople engage with customers. This is how we know that we are moving forward in a deal, because early in the deal, we made sure to do these things, make sure that, had the right target client profile, establish the right criteria. Later in the deal, we want to make sure that we understand this, that, and the other before we invest a bunch of money in a proposal. You don't need to micromanage salespeople, but having expectations clear across your sales team about how a deal should flow is I don't want to say it's simple, because it takes some work to really get clarity and agreement and buy-in. And I think that's really valuable work. But once you have clarity, agreement, and buy-in across your team around the framework with which you go to market, you've really changed the dynamic of your company from, I've got a couple of salespeople and they run out and do something, I don't know what it is, and sometimes they get results, to, I've got a system and I can not only understand what they're doing, but I can impact that in a positive way. And I think that's a much more pleasant environment for everyone to work in. And under almost any circumstance I can think of, it would certainly lead to more success.
Well, you can't do process improvement unless you have an agreed upon process that you're improving, because
Right.
then it's not observable, right? At that point, it's like, well, Larry's really good with customers, or Mary's really good with this kind of customer. Why is she really good? Why do you even believe that? Oftentimes, you talked about KPIs and metrics. A lot of these organizations don't. I mean, they have one metric, which is sales, bookings,
Right.
or revenue, but they don't
Right.
really know how that happened, and what led to that. And once I understand that, I can maybe try to repeat those steps and do them again. And then there's just one thing, David, you said that I think was incredibly powerful. I mean, all of what you said was right on point, but one thing in particular, you said, that's, how do you want the customer experience to be when they engage with your sales process, right? If you sell a complex product that needs a salesperson somewhere in the mix, it's not something that they're just checking a box on an e-commerce site, but it's actually a human interaction. Do you, as an owner, really know what that experience is going to look like for them by and large. Like you said, no, there's not robots, so there's going to be some variance between Larry, Moe, and Curly, but you want to know that at least there's a general baseline that you can feel confident our customers experience. And that's a culture thing too. So how often do you find that you have to really speak to owners about their overall like company culture, how they think about customers at every level? It's not just the sales rep. Do you expand into a little bit of that to empower your sales process?
I think company culture is hugely important, but I wish I had a good analogy for this. I don't. Maybe you do, but I don't think you can start there, right? I don't think you can start by saying you guys need to have a good culture and this is what it looks like. What I've found is that when you create an environment of positive support, clear expectations, and real accountability, not just to that final number, but what it takes to get to that number, which means management is actually involved with reps one way or the other, different for different circumstances, but, involved. It can't be a black box. When you have that kind of accountability and that kind of a supportive environment, culture grows, the right kind of culture, a culture where reps feel that this is an organization that not only expects, but that helps develop excellence. And of all the words that you could tie to culture, if excellence is the one that you've tied to culture, I think you're probably on the right track.
All right. So you kind of want to lean into a direction without making it feel like psychobabbly, which is the feedback I get from a lot of time owners at this size business. They don't have time for that. And
I'm an optimist, Jose. I tend to believe that people want to do good work. Obviously, that isn't true all the time, but I think there's just a lot of frustration in B2B sales. There's a lot of frustration all over the world, but I tend to see more of it in B2B sales because that's where I spend my time. And I think a lot of this frustration is, reps aren't really clear about what to do and what's expected of them from the side of the company. They go out and do stuff and some of it works and they sometimes hit their number and maybe they get President's Club and, yada, yada, yada. But that's different than coming into work and saying, yep, I know what the expectation is. I know I'm going to be supported. I know my boss has my back. I know he's going to have my backside if I don't do what I'm supposed to do. Like clear expectations goes a really long way. And if clear expectations happen, because you were deliberate about developing that, and that happens within an environment where there's real support and real accountability, real because management actually understands what's happening. I mean, how often do you hear the situation where, you sit down with salespeople and they think management is just, out of touch or doesn't understand? That's not going to engender a good culture. And you can't have a lecture about culture to help you solve that problem. What solves that problem is getting clarity, getting buy-in, getting agreement, optimizing together. I've been using a phrase very recently. A friend actually pointed it out to me, what he feels like when clients work with me, as I was describing it to him. He called it co-created clarity. Let's work together to map out what it is that we're doing. And that way, if everybody's involved in the process, which is much easier with a smaller organization, but if everybody's involved in the process, then you've got buy-in, you've got all the perspectives represented. You don't have a couple of people who are like, yeah, that's really great what you guys came up with in the conference room, but it has nothing to do with the way I do business. It's really hard to move the ball forward when you've got that kind of baggage around your sales improvement effort. So I think to get to culture, you got to do the kind of work to become the kind of organization that people want to work for, and they know what's expected of them, and they know that you're striving for excellence, and you know what happens when you're not striving for excellence. And I think culture emerges from that kind of an environment. You can't impose culture onto an environment where those kind of things don't really exist. At least that's been my experience.
Well, I had my systems thinking professor. He would say culture is kind of the default operating system of your business. It's the basis upon which people make decisions. So if you have a culture of, like you said, excellence and making sure the customer comes first, when the customer calls with a crazy request, Person says, okay, let me make sure I get this right, because all I see around us is a company that tries to meet those requests. If the culture, on the other hand, views it, and this often happens, where, oh man, life would be easy except for customers. That
Yeah.
same request comes in, and then the person says, what's that? You want me to do what? And it becomes very negative. And that's the default operating system. No banner, no plaque will fix that at its heart. So I love the way you talked about co-created clarity. It's like, let's have these conversations. Let's figure out which way to go forward. Which brings me to kind of the next kind of like subtopic here around sales excellence. And that's why I'm very much looking forward to talking to you, David, because I know that's your whole specialization. Part of that is also adding to the team. So let's say you have an owner that had a 2-person team, wasn't sure they believed that much in sales. They knew they needed it, but and now you've been working with them, and they really have started ramping up a sales system. They believe in the machine, it can work. But now they want to expand, they want to grow. And the 2 people they have are really kind of 2, 3 people, whatever they are, they're max. They need to hire the next one. And by the way, I just find in this category of business, hiring salespeople isn't usually what you'd associate as their top skill. They're not that good at it. And even big companies struggle with this as well. What are some of the things you do with your clients to help them hire better?
Yeah, so there's 2 things. There's more than 2 things, but there's 2 things that I'll focus on to answer the question. The first is exactly the same as the culture question. If you are hiring into a sales role and that role is not clear internally, it's going to be not clear to the person who's coming in, and you're just not setting them up for success. That doesn't really address the point, how do I find them? How do I, pick which one I want to hire? But from the point when somebody is hired, actually, that's not true. From before they're hired, if you have this kind of co-created clarity, you're able to set expectations in a much more clear way. You're able to do a target candidate profile as opposed to a target client profile. It's not just a mechanism that works when you're facing customers. What does a great salesperson for our organization look like? Which is much easier to answer when you're very clear about what your current successful salespeople are actually doing in the field to get new business. We tend to succeed when this happens, that happens, the other happens. So we need someone who's got a demonstrated ability of making those things happen. So that's kind of the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, to me, it's like cheating. I use a sales specific assessment that's got a fantastic track record. There's a lot of assessments out there that call themselves sales assessments. They're really, personality assessments or behavioral assessments or psychographic assessments. My experience has been, and like you, I think most of us in sales have taken a lot of these tests. And the personality test, for example, they're great at telling you about your personality. But if you've been in sales for a while, lots of people with lots of different personalities succeed and lots of people with those same personalities fail. So I've never had a lot of faith. I think those kind of assessments are very good for helping you manage people because you can understand them better. But there are sales specific assessments out there. One that I use that is, it's just all about hiring great salespeople. And I think if you rely on the assessment 100%, that's probably not right. But if it gives you the insights to kind of narrow down what you're looking for, narrow down your field of candidates, and then drill into the right kind of questions. I have clients who have used this assessment that I recommend tell me, this just makes me better at interviewing. It makes me better at hiring. I just have more insight into who I'm looking for, how this person matches up to that profile, and what I ought to talk to them about when we're sitting down in that interview together. So it's kind of cheating, right? I mean, it's no magic formula for me. I use a good assessment. And I think if you can find an assessment that works for you, preferably one that was designed for sales and not for something else, and then, kind of morph into sales.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's extremely helpful.
Wow. Well, I love that approach, because what it does is says that you can sift down, if you get for a job posting, you get 50 people, resumes look like whatever, sales professional, whatever, but running them through the assessment, you might whittle that down to 5, and you could spend a lot more time. I recently worked with a client that we did, and very limited headcount, but they need to bring somebody in. And we actually had experience bringing people who were not from the industry, but it's a consumer facing product, but training somebody with the right raw material. So we did the assessment. We found somebody that was actually pretty good, that we thought would be pretty good. And then what we did is we said, I wonder if this person would be willing, because this would tie into culture, to spend a day in the field with our existing team and actually experience it, join meetings, do this, spend the whole day without giving us a hard time about doing it. Like, am I going to get paid for that or what? It wasn't the point. And sure enough, person did. They got to ride privately with their future peers to say, hey, they're promising X, Y, and Z. Did they really deliver that? And my point is, when you sift the list down to a smaller number, you can do a much deeper investigation to see whether you have a match or not. Where as opposed to trying to read through, like you said, 50 different, applications, and I agree with you, assessments that really are looking for things that may or may not correlate to sales success for your organization, which is very common. One other quick thing there, David, that I have found, and I'm just curious your feedback on this, especially in a lot of very technical sales situations in industrial categories. I find that owners kind of overweigh technical and industry knowledge over sales acumen. In effect, they want to reproduce themselves or their best engineer, who may not be a good salesperson. Have you run into that as well? I run into that pretty consistently.
I do. And I love this question, because I think if somebody isn't sure what sales is, this is a great question to answer it. I think the most simple definition of sales is you got to get into conversations. You got to successfully navigate a conversation, and then you got to bring that conversation to an agreement about whether or not you're going to do business together, efficiently. And it's that middle part where the magic really happens. A lot of people are very fixated on the front end. How am I going to get into the conversation? Because that's challenging and people don't know how to do it. And, they don't want to be spammy and they don't want to be salesy. But once you get into that conversation, it really is the ability to understand the prospect situation, to ask great questions, to bring in observations from other experiences that you have that might be relevant, to keep the conversation going in a direction that might lead to an agreement to work together. So I think the whole idea of an engineer or a doctor doing a diagnosis or a technical expert as the heart of what happens in sales is absolutely spot on. The problem is, I think a lot of people believe that if you have that, you don't need the other stuff. And you can outsource the front part. You can have somebody else set up the meeting for your technical expert. And your technical expert could be, oriented to do a good job having that conversation. But it's that third part where they tend to fall off. Because that middle part where you're having that conversation, it needs to be directed at some kind of an agreement to move forward one way or the other. And your owner has a lot of desire to make the business succeed, has a commitment to make the business succeed, and is hardwired to be driving towards, okay, are we going to do something or not? Because I got to meet payroll. A salesperson with those kind of skills, an engineer who's put in that situation without those kind of sales skills probably doesn't have that context. What I've found is that it's not that hard to take an engineer who wants to do sales, and that part's important. But if they want to be successful in sales, you give them that framework and they kind of understand that it's not just solving the problem, which most of these folks have a lot of passion for, but it's solving the problem and leading that to a decision at the end of the process, one way or another. You don't always get the sale. It's not always a good fit, but that the orientation is towards some kind of a conclusion. It can be a game changer when somebody really embraces that concept and understands how to manifest that in the middle and even in the first part of that three-step sales model I just described.
No, I love it. I love getting into conversation, managing that middle part where you're creating value and associating past deeds with future possibilities, but making sure it's advancing somewhere as a relationship. Otherwise, you end up with, and I've seen it as well, where everybody is really good to get you to the 20-yard line,
Yep.
But it's like, I said, they think game's over. We got to the 20. I said, that's not the end. You know, you have to.
Yeah. And they run back to the office and they write up the world's greatest proposal and send it out, believing that's going to get it over the goal line.
Right.
That's a very common mistake.
Right. No, that's fantastic. David, thank you so much. Look, this has been great. I know we could go on for hours. This is talking sales. It's fun. It's good stuff. If somebody listening right now, David, and hearing you and your clear expertise in this area, and they wanted to know more about you, get in touch with you, where should they go?
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I appreciate the conversation as well. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about today and that we've talked about today is embodied in a program that I just released. So if somebody's interested in learning more about what I do with organizations, salesteamsuccessformula.com. That'll take you to davidmasover.com, but you'll learn everything you need to know there. And, that's an easy thing to remember. So salesteamsuccessformula.com is a great way to reach me, or you can always find me on LinkedIn or Google.
Fantastic. David, once again, thank you for taking the time to be with us and sharing your insights.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. If you like this episode and if you like the series, make sure you subscribe below. And also, if you liked it, please do review it. When people are looking for something exciting to listen to, especially the kind of content we're bringing, which is practical insights for B2B companies, this is a place and a free resource that they can take advantage of. Let them know about it with your review. So subscribe, review, enjoy. Thanks again.